Trust is commonly treated as a verbal construct. People believe it is built through assurances, explanations, and stated intentions. As a result, trust is often pursued through conversation rather than behavior. Promises are made to stabilize uncertainty, reassure insecurity, or repair damage. Yet promises rarely create trust. At best, they postpone doubt. At worst, they intensify it. Trust does not emerge from what is said about the future. It emerges from what is demonstrated over time. Repetition is the true architecture of trust. Repetition does not mean monotony or predictability of behavior. It means consistency of orientation across changing conditions. When a man responds to different situations from the same internal position, emotional systems begin to relax. Relaxation is the precursor to trust. Without relaxation, trust cannot form because vigilance remains active. Promises activate imagination. Repetition activates memory. Emotional systems rely on memory far more than imagination. A promise asks the other person to believe in an outcome that has not yet occurred. Repetition provides evidence of pattern that has already occurred. Evidence stabilizes perception. Imagination destabilizes it. This is why repeated alignment builds trust quietly, while repeated promises often create pressure. Another important distinction lies in risk distribution. Promises place risk on the listener. The listener must invest belief and hope. Repetition places risk on the actor. The actor must continue behaving in alignment, regardless of short-term outcome. Emotional systems interpret who carries risk. Trust grows toward those who assume risk rather than shift it outward. Trust also depends on temporal coherence. A promise exists in the future. Repetition exists across time. When behavior aligns today, tomorrow, and under stress, coherence forms. Coherence allows emotional memory to organize itself. Once memory stabilizes, trust no longer requires conscious effort. It becomes implicit. Many men attempt to repair trust through explanation. They clarify intent, justify decisions, or reframe events. Explanation may reduce confusion, but it rarely restores trust. Trust is not lost because intent was misunderstood. It is lost because pattern was disrupted. Only pattern can repair pattern. Words cannot substitute for repetition. Repetition also reduces interpretive load. When behavior is consistent, fewer meanings are projected onto each interaction. Silence does not trigger speculation. Delay does not provoke anxiety. Emotional systems conserve energy because fewer interpretations are required. This conservation creates safety. Safety deepens trust. Promises, by contrast, increase interpretive load. Each promise invites monitoring. Was it fulfilled? Was it delayed? Was it sincere? Monitoring creates vigilance. Vigilance prevents trust from settling. Even fulfilled promises can sustain vigilance if repetition is absent. Trust also depends on proportionality. When behavior matches context appropriately and repeatedly, emotional systems learn what to expect. Expectations grounded in experience feel safe. Expectations grounded in assurance feel fragile. Fragility invites testing. Testing erodes trust. Importantly, repetition does not require perfection. Mistakes do not destroy trust if orientation remains intact. What damages trust is not error, but unpredictability of response to error. When a man responds to mistakes in a familiar, grounded way, trust can survive imperfection. When responses fluctuate, trust erodes even if intentions are good. This is why trust often forms without conscious agreement. People do not decide to trust. They notice that they already do. That realization occurs only after sufficient repetition has accumulated. Trust arrives as a recognition, not a conclusion. Trust also determines how vulnerability is processed. When trust is based on promises, vulnerability becomes conditional. It is offered cautiously, then withdrawn if reassurance fades. When trust is based on repetition, vulnerability becomes natural. It is not traded for guarantees. It emerges because the environment feels predictable enough to allow exposure without risk of collapse. Another overlooked aspect of trust is its relationship with power. Promises often attempt to equalize power by reassuring the other person that nothing will be taken. Repetition redistributes power by demonstrating that stability does not depend on appeasement. Emotional systems trust those who do not negotiate stability through reassurance. Trust further influences how conflict resolves. In low-trust dynamics, conflict reopens old wounds because patterns are unclear. Each disagreement reactivates doubt. In high-trust dynamics, conflict remains contained because orientation is known. Disagreement does not threaten the relationship's foundation. This containment allows resolution without escalation. Repetition also clarifies boundaries. When boundaries are held consistently, they become part of the relational landscape. They no longer require explanation or defense. Trust forms because predictability replaces negotiation. People know where limits exist without being reminded. Promises often fail at boundaries because they are easily overridden by emotion. A promise to change means little if behavior shifts under pressure. Repetition under pressure is what teaches emotional systems that boundaries are real. Reality builds trust more effectively than reassurance. Trust also shapes attraction. Attraction weakens when trust is absent because uncertainty dominates perception. Repetition reduces uncertainty without eliminating mystery. This balance allows attraction to stabilize rather than spike and crash. Trust does not eliminate desire, it anchors it. Another dimension of trust involves exit conditions. When repetition demonstrates that alignment is valued over maintenance, trust increases even in the possibility of separation. Paradoxically, trust deepens when people know that connection is not preserved through force. Voluntary continuation feels safer than coerced stability. From a psychological perspective, trust is the byproduct of regulated expectation. Repetition regulates expectation by aligning experience with outcome. Promises inflate expectation without regulating experience. Inflation creates disappointment, even when outcomes are reasonable. Over time, repetition builds an internal model of the other person. This model allows prediction without control. Prediction reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety allows closeness. Closeness reinforces trust. This loop cannot be created through promises because promises do not update internal models reliably. Trust also preserves dignity. When trust is earned through repetition, neither party needs to convince or reassure excessively. Interaction becomes simpler. Simplicity reduces emotional strain. Reduced strain extends longevity. Ultimately, trust forms when behavior communicates the same message across contexts. Calm moments, stressful moments, moments of distance, and moments of closeness all reflect the same orientation. This continuity allows emotional systems to stand down from vigilance. That is why trust cannot be promised into existence. It cannot be argued, negotiated, or demanded. It must be lived repeatedly until it becomes undeniable. When trust exists, it is felt rather than declared, and that is why repetition, not promises, is the true foundation of trust. Emotional maturity is often misunderstood as a set of communicative skills. People assume it can be demonstrated through articulation, emotional vocabulary, or the ability to discuss feelings calmly. While these abilities may accompany maturity, they do not define it. Emotional maturity is not something that persuades through language. It is something that registers through presence. Others sense it before they can name it, because it operates at the level of nervous system recognition rather than cognitive agreement. This is why attempts to explain maturity often fail. Explanation addresses the intellect. Maturity is assessed by perception. A man may describe himself as grounded, aware, or emotionally intelligent, yet still feel unstable to those around him. Conversely, another man may say very little about his inner world and still be experienced as solid. The difference lies not in expression, but in regulation. Emotional maturity reflects the capacity to remain internally ordered, while emotional input is present. One of the clearest indicators of maturity is proportional response. Emotionally mature individuals respond in scale. Small issues remain small. Significant issues receive appropriate attention. Disproportion reveals unresolved internal tension. Overreaction suggests emotional backlog. Underreaction suggests avoidance. Proportion signals integration. Integration allows emotion to move without distorting behavior. Emotional immaturity often manifests as urgency. The need to resolve, clarify, or fix appears quickly when discomfort arises. Urgency is not concern. It is intolerance of uncertainty. Maturity tolerates uncertainty without collapsing into action. This tolerance is not passive. It is attentive. The individual remains engaged while allowing time to perform its organizing function. Another dimension of maturity involves responsibility for internal state. Immature dynamics externalize regulation. One person's mood becomes another person's problem. Emotional maturity internalizes regulation. Feelings are acknowledged without being displaced onto the environment. This does not mean isolation. It means ownership. Ownership stabilizes interaction because it prevents emotional contagion. Maturity also reshapes how empathy functions. Immature empathy absorbs emotion indiscriminately. It mirrors distress and amplifies it. Mature empathy recognizes emotion without merging with it. This distinction matters because absorption increases chaos, while recognition provides containment. Others feel understood without being overwhelmed. Emotionally mature individuals also display temporal stability. Their orientation does not reset with each interaction. Yesterday's alignment carries into today. Today's tension does not erase tomorrow's direction. This continuity allows emotional memory to form reliably. Reliability reduces vigilance. Reduced vigilance allows closeness without fear. Attempts to explain maturity often arise from insecurity. The need to be seen as mature suggests uncertainty about being experienced as such. Maturity does not require self-advertisement. It is inferred through repetition of calm, grounded responses across contexts. Over time, this repetition becomes unmistakable. Importantly, maturity does not eliminate emotional intensity. It channels it. Intensity without structure overwhelms. Intensity with structure deepens experience. The emotionally mature man can feel strongly without acting destructively. This capacity expands relational depth because strong emotion no longer threatens stability. Attraction responds to this quality because it signals safety without dullness. Emotional maturity does not flatten experience. It refines it. It allows passion to exist without volatility. This balance sustains desire rather than exhausting it. Emotional maturity also governs how boundaries are experienced. Immature boundaries fluctuate. They are asserted emotionally, then abandoned under pressure. This inconsistency creates confusion. Mature boundaries are quiet. They do not need repeated defense because they are enacted consistently. Consistency communicates seriousness more effectively than intensity. Maturity further influences how accountability is handled. Immature individuals defend self-image. Mistakes trigger justification or blame shifting. Mature individuals integrate error without identity collapse. Accountability becomes corrective rather than threatening. This capacity increases trust because it signals resilience rather than fragility. Another critical marker of maturity is tolerance for difference. Immature systems require agreement to feel safe. Disagreement is experienced as rejection. Mature systems allow divergence without destabilization. Differences become information rather than threat. This tolerance permits authentic connection rather than conditional harmony. Maturity also alters the relationship with control. Immature individuals attempt to manage outcomes to reduce anxiety. Mature individuals manage self to remain aligned regardless of outcome. This internal focus reduces manipulation, coercion, and hidden negotiation. Interaction becomes cleaner because fewer agendas are operating beneath the surface. Emotional maturity also reshapes vulnerability. Immature vulnerability seeks regulation from others. It offloads emotional weight. Mature vulnerability shares experience without transferring responsibility. This distinction preserves dignity on both sides. Vulnerability no longer weakens attraction because it does not demand caretaking. From a developmental perspective, emotional maturity reflects integration of experience rather than accumulation of insight. Insight alone does not produce maturity. Integration does. Integration requires exposure, reflection, and time. This is why maturity cannot be rushed or performed convincingly. It is the residue of lived regulation. Maturity also determines how endings are handled. Immature endings are chaotic. They involve blame, escalation, or emotional flooding. Mature endings preserve coherence. Separation occurs without character assassination or self-betrayal. This ability signals depth of development, regardless of relational outcome. Another overlooked aspect of maturity is restraint. Restraint is not suppression. It is the ability to choose not to act on every impulse. This choice preserves optionality. Optionality increases power because action remains deliberate rather than compelled. Emotional maturity expands choice. Maturity also reduces performative behavior. There is less need to appear strong, caring, or enlightened. Behavior becomes simpler because it is no longer compensating. Simplicity communicates confidence. Confidence grounded in regulation feels safe rather than arrogant. Over time, emotional maturity becomes perceptible even in silence. Tone, pacing, and presence carry information. Words become secondary. Others adjust naturally because the environment feels stable. This adjustment is unconscious and reliable. Ultimately, emotional maturity is recognized, not explained. It reveals itself through how a person responds under strain, delay, disagreement, and uncertainty. It is felt in the absence of urgency, the presence of proportion, and the consistency of orientation. That is why emotional maturity cannot be taught through instruction alone. It must be embodied. When embodied, it requires no justification. It is sensed immediately and trusted gradually. And that is why emotional maturity is felt, not explained.